Imagine a land hidden deep in the heart of Southeast Asia, shrouded in the mists of ancient kingdoms, carved by the flow of the Mekong, scarred by the roar of bombs. This is Laos, a country once bombed for months on end, yet still preserving the golden glow of countless temples. But its history is far older, more layered, filled with beauty and tragedy. Imagine the land we now call Laos, not as a nation on a map, but as an unbroken sea of green, a quilt of jungles, mountains, and river valleys. The year is not counted in numbers, because numbers have yet to be invented. The only clock is the sun's slow rise over the mist-shrouded Mekong and its steady descent beyond jagged limestone cliffs. This is a world before history, but not before people. Long before kingdoms, before written words, before even the concept of Laos, human beings walked these valleys. Archaeologists tell us that evidence of human presence here goes back more than 8,000 years, to the 6th millennium BCE. In caves and ancient river terraces, stone tools lie buried under layers of silt, chipped hand axes, scrapers, and arrowheads, all silent testimonies to lives lived in a world of survival and adaptation. We can picture them, small bands of hunter-gatherers, skin darkened by the sun, moving along the rivers in dugout canoes. Their world was both generous and unforgiving. The forests provided fruits, wild game, and medicinal plants, but also hid predators, tigers, leopards, and venomous snakes. The people knew every bird call, every shift in the wind. Somewhere around 4000 BCE, a transformation began, a slow, almost invisible revolution. Seeds were kept and planted. Wild rice, long gathered in the marshes, began to be cultivated. The first small clearings were made in the forest to grow tubers, bananas, and other staples. This was the dawn of agriculture in the Mekong Basin. With it came change. Instead of moving constantly, people began to settle in one place for longer periods. Villages took shape, not the bustling towns of later centuries, but small clusters of stilted houses woven from bamboo, each with its own patch of cultivated earth. The rivers were highways. The Mekong, winding through the land like a silver serpent, connected these early settlements. It carried not only fish and silt for the fields, but also ideas. Even before formal trade, there was exchange, tools for pottery, salt for dried meat. Over time, the currents of the Mekong reached far, to what is now Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and even southern China. By 700 BCE, the Iron Age had reached these valleys. The change was dramatic. With iron tools, farmers could clear more land and shape stronger weapons. Bronze drums, intricately decorated with patterns of birds and geometric designs, appeared, linking Laos to the Dong Son culture of northern Vietnam. These drums were not mere musical instruments. They were symbols of status, played at ceremonies to summon ancestors and spirits. One of the most mysterious legacies of this time lies on a high plateau in the province of Xinjiang, the Plain of Jars. Scattered across the rolling hills are thousands of massive stone jars, each weighing several tons. Some stand alone, others cluster in groups. They are empty now, their purpose still debated. Were they funerary urns, fermentation vessels for rice wine used in grand feasts, or markers of long-forgotten boundaries? Carbon dating and excavation suggest they were placed here between 1240 and 660 BCE. Imagine the effort it took to carve them from solid rock and transport them across the land without wheels or modern tools. Legends have their own explanation. The most famous tells of a race of giants who once lived here. Victorious in battle, their king ordered great jars to brew rice wine to celebrate. The hills, it is said, still remember the music and laughter of those ancient feasts. Whether or not the giants ever walked this plateau, the jars stand as silent witnesses to a civilization sophisticated enough to plan, carve, and transport monuments that would outlast their makers by millennia. Life in these early communities revolved around cycles: planting, harvesting, celebrating, mourning. The spiritual world was close at hand. Animism, the belief that rivers, trees, rocks, and animals all have spirits, guided daily life. A fisherman would whisper to the Mekong before casting his net. A farmer might leave offerings at the base of a great tree before cutting nearby bamboo. Social structures were emerging. Villages often centered on a chief, someone not just physically strong but also wise in reading the signs of the seasons, settling disputes, and communicating with the spirit world. Elders held oral histories, long rhythmic tales recited by firelight to teach the young where they had come from and how they should live. Trade became more organized. From the north came jade and silk, from the south, shells and salt, from the west, bronze and beads. In return, the people of this land offered forest products, resins, rare woods, ivory, and skilled craftsmanship. Small riverine markets began to appear, seasonal gatherings where goods were exchanged, alliances formed, and marriages arranged. By the dawn of the first millennium BCE, this part of the Mekong Basin was no longer an isolated world. It was a crossroads, a place where cultures touched and merged. Influences from early Indian civilization began to filter in, not yet the full sweep of Hinduism or Buddhism, but symbols, motifs, and ideas carried by traders. A new vocabulary of shapes and designs appeared in pottery and textile patterns. And yet, despite these connections, life retained its rhythm of the land. A day might begin with the call of gibbons echoing from the forest canopy, the smell of rice steaming over a clay hearth, the chatter of children chasing dogs through the village. At night, the air would be thick with the hum of insects, the glow of fireflies over the paddies, and the deep, slow voice of an elder recounting how the world began. When we look back at this time, it's tempting to see it as primitive, but that word misses the truth. These people understood their environment in a way modern society rarely does. They knew which plants healed wounds, which herbs could bring down a fever, which fish would rise in the river after a certain moon. They built houses designed to survive monsoon floods, raised rice that could endure seasonal droughts, and kept a balance with the forest that sustained them. The foundations of Lao culture were already here. The respect for elders, the close relationship to rivers, the rhythm of agricultural life, and the belief that the spiritual and physical worlds are intertwined. Over the centuries to come, kingdoms would rise and fall, foreign powers would come and go, but these roots would remain, deep in the soil, anchoring the people of this land. This is the Laos before names and borders, a land where history whispered in the rustle of bamboo leaves and the splash of an oar in the Mekong, a land waiting for the first great kingdoms to emerge, for leaders to unite scattered villages into something greater. That story begins in the next chapter, with the people on the move, carrying their language, their beliefs, and their dreams from the mountains of China into the valleys of Laos. The story of Laos shifts in this chapter from the stillness of ancient villages to the restless movement of entire peoples. Our stage is still the Mekong Basin, but now the scene extends far to the north, into the misty mountains and deep river valleys of what is today's southern China. Here, for centuries, Thai-speaking peoples lived in scattered communities. They farmed rice on terraced hillsides, fished the rivers, and shared a linguistic heritage distinct from the great empires that surrounded them. Their language, their customs, and their social structures were their own, and yet they lived in a world of shifting power. In the first millennium CE, the expansion of powerful kingdoms and the pressure of population growth began to push these Thai communities southward. Some historians point to the rise of the Lan Xang Kingdom in Yunnan 8th-9th centuries, and later the Mongol incursions in the 13th century as catalysts. Others suggest climate changes or the lure of fertile, less crowded lands. Whatever the reasons, the movement began, slow at first, then gaining momentum over centuries. Imagine the migration not as a single exodus, but as waves, families and clans, moving season by season, seeking valleys where the soil was rich and the water abundant. They carried their culture in the most portable form: songs, oral histories, weaving patterns, religious beliefs. These were not rootless wanderers, they were planters, intent on making new homes. By the 8th century, some Thai groups had reached the northern fringes of what is now Laos. They found a land already inhabited by diverse peoples, the Austroasiatic-speaking Mon Khmer communities, who had lived here for centuries, and smaller tribal groups in the mountains. The Thai did not sweep these people aside. Instead, they often intermarried, traded, and gradually integrated, blending traditions into something new. The Thai brought with them wet rice cultivation techniques, honed over generations. They built intricate irrigation systems, carving channels from streams to flood their paddies. This allowed them to grow surplus crops, the foundation of population growth and more complex societies. They also brought a social structure that would shape Lao history. The Muang, a Muang was more than a village, less than a kingdom. It was a political and cultural unit. a cluster of settlements bound together by loyalty to a local ruler, the Chao Muang. His authority was part hereditary, part merit-based, and grounded in his ability to protect his people, manage water resources, and mediate disputes. The Muang was both practical and symbolic. It was the community's shield against outsiders and the expression of its identity. From the 9th to the 12th centuries, Muang after Muang took root along the Mekong and its tributaries. Some remained small and self-contained. Others, strategically placed on trade routes, grew wealthy and ambitious. One of the most important was centered on the area of present-day Luang Prabang, known then as Muang Swa. It occupied a fertile valley where the Nam Khan River meets the Mekong, a crossroads for river trade and a defensible site surrounded by hills. The shadow of greater powers loomed over these early Lao polities. To the south and east, the Khmer Empire radiated influence from Angkor. Its reach extended into parts of what is now southern Laos, bringing Indianized culture, Sanskrit terms for royalty, Hindu-Buddhist cosmology, monumental architecture in stone. Khmer political dominance was never absolute in the north, but their cultural imprint was deep. In the style of temple carvings, in the rituals of court life, traces of Khmer influence remain visible. To the west, emerging Thai polities in what is now Thailand, such as Sukhothai, in later centuries, shared linguistic and cultural roots with the Lao, creating a web of kinship and rivalry that would endure for centuries. The meeting of Thai newcomers and established Hmong Khmer communities was not always peaceful. Control of fertile valleys and trade routes could spark conflict. Oral traditions tell of wars between rival Muang, of raids to seize livestock and grain, and of shifting alliances sealed by marriage or tribute. But more often than not, the outcome was integration, a blending of customs into the evolving tapestry of Lao culture. Daily life in these early polities was shaped by the seasons. At planting time, entire communities worked the fields together, their songs echoing across the paddies. During harvest, celebrations filled the air with music from bamboo flutes and the thump of bronze drums. Animist beliefs infused every action. Before clearing new land, offerings were made to the Phi, the guardian spirits of place. These spirits could bless or curse, and their favor was sought with food, incense, and the rhythmic chant of shamans. By the 12th century, Indian-influenced Theravada Buddhism began to make inroads, likely carried by Mon monks from the south and from the Dvaravati culture in central Thailand. The two belief systems, Buddhism and animism, did not clash. Instead, they wove together. Villagers might offer rice to monks in the morning and leave offerings to a tree spirit in the afternoon. This syncretism would become a hallmark of Lao spirituality. Trade bound these communities into a wider world. Riverboats carried forest products, lac, cardamom, resin, precious hardwoods, downstream to markets connected to Khmer and Cam ports. From there, goods might reach as far as India, China, or the Middle East. In return came cloth, beads, and iron tools. The Muang leaders, controlling river crossings and storage depots, took their share in taxes and tribute. Muang Swa, the seed of what would become Luang Prabang, grew in both wealth and prestige. Its rulers traced their lineage to semi-mythical ancestors, often blending history and legend to legitimize their rule. One tale speaks of a ruler descended from a Naga, the serpent spirit of the river, granting him divine right to govern. Whether fact or folklore, such stories bound the people's loyalty to their leaders. The political landscape of the 12th and 13th centuries was fluid. The Khmer Empire still influenced the south, but its power was beginning to wane. In Yunnan, the Mongols under Kublai Khan were on the rise, sending ripples of upheaval through the Thai world. In this environment of shifting power, ambitious leaders saw an opportunity to unite scattered Muang under stronger rule. It is in this crucible, the meeting of Thai migration, local integration, external influence, and emerging ambition, that the first outlines of a Lao kingdom began to appear. The valley of Muang Swa would play a starring role in what was to come, but it would take a leader of vision and force to transform scattered city-states into a realm recognized across the region. That leader would be Phaya Ngum, a prince in exile, raised in the grandeur of Angkor, destined to return north and forge the kingdom of Lan Xang. His arrival marks the next great turning point in our story, the moment when the Laos step fully into the recorded history of Southeast Asia. The year is 1353. The Mekong runs high with the rains. carrying silt from the mountains into the fertile valleys of Muang. The villages along its banks hum with activity, children chasing each other through the rice fields, merchants unloading boats at the river landing, monks in saffron robes walking silently from house to house, their bowls filling with morning offerings. No one can know it yet, but this year will mark the birth of a kingdom that will define Lao identity for centuries. The kingdom of Lan Xang, the land of 1,000,000 elephants. The architect of this transformation is a man named Fa Ngum. His story begins not in the quiet valleys of Laos, but in the resplendent capital of the Khmer Empire. As a young prince of Muang, Fa Ngum had been exiled to Angkor after palace intrigues and shifting alliances drove his family from power. There, he grew up in the shadow of towering stone temples, surrounded by the wealth and sophistication of one of Southeast Asia's greatest empires. He learned statecraft, warfare, and the Theravada Buddhist faith that would become the spiritual backbone of his reign. By his 20s, Fa Ngum had married a Khmer princess, cementing ties to the royal house of Angkor, yet his eyes were set to the north. In 1351, as the Khmer Empire began to wane under pressure from Siam and internal decline, Fa Ngum saw his chance. With an army granted by his Khmer father-in-law, some accounts say 10,000 strong, others place the number far higher, he marched upriver to reclaim his homeland. The campaign was swift and decisive. Fa Ngum was not merely a warrior, he was a strategist. He understood the value of river control, capturing key Hmong along the Mekong, cutting off rival leaders from their allies. He offered vassalage to some, battle to others. By 1353, he had entered Muang and been crowned king. The kingdom of Lan Xang was born, its name a bold proclamation of strength. Lan for million, Shang for elephants, symbols of military power, royal prestige, and the riches of the land. The kingdom's territory, at its height, stretched from the highlands bordering China to the Mekong's lower reaches near present-day Cambodia. This was not an empire in the European sense. It was a network of tributary Hmong bound by loyalty, marriage alliances, and the authority of the Chow Fa, the heavenly prince. Fa Ngum's capital was established at Luang Prabang, then still known as Muang, a natural stronghold nestled between mountains and rivers. From the start, Fa Ngum's reign combined military might with cultural ambition. He imported artisans, architects, and scholars from Angkor to build temples, palaces, and irrigation works. Perhaps his most enduring legacy was the introduction of the Prabang, a golden Buddha statue said to have been a gift from the Khmer royal family. It became the kingdom's most sacred relic, lending spiritual legitimacy to his rule, and eventually giving Luang Prabang its modern name. Lan Xang's early years were marked by expansion. Fa Ngum extended his influence westward into the Korat Plateau, eastward into the Annamite Mountains, and south into territories contested with Siam and Kampa. These campaigns brought wealth, tribute in rice, forest products, and elephants, but also forged enemies. Siam, newly ascendant under the Ayutthaya kingdom, viewed Lan Xang's growth with suspicion. Border skirmishes became common, foreshadowing centuries of rivalry. Religion was central to Fa Ngum's vision. Theravada Buddhism became the official faith of Lan Xang, not replacing older animist traditions but weaving itself into them. Monasteries were built not only as places of worship, but as centers of learning, diplomacy, and art. Monks served as advisors to rulers, scribes, and emissaries to foreign courts. The Sangha, or monastic community, became a unifying force across the kingdom's diverse ethnic landscape. When Fa Ngum's rule grew harsh, some accounts speak of increasingly authoritarian measures and heavy demands on vassals. Dissent rose among the nobility. Around 1373, he was deposed and replaced by his son, Aun Huon, who took the throne as King Samson-thai. The Million Tide. Samson-thai's reign, lasting over 4 decades, brought stability. He codified laws, organized the kingdom into administrative districts, and strengthened ties with neighboring states. Under his careful hand, Lan Xang enjoyed a period of relative peace. Trade flourished. The Mekong became a corridor of exchange, with goods flowing from the mountains to the sea. Forest products, lacquerware, textiles, and elephants were traded for silk, ceramics, and metalwork from China, Vietnam, and Siam. Merchants from as far as India and the Malay world appeared in Lan Xang's markets, their boats heavy with spices and cloth. The kingdom's position at the crossroads of mainland Southeast Asia was both a blessing and a challenge, enriching it, but also drawing it into the ambitions of greater powers. In the early 16th century, a new figure rose to prominence, King Setthathirath, r. 1522–1548. Though his reign would extend beyond the period of rise and expansion into Lan Xang's consolidation, his policies reflected the kingdom's maturing identity. He moved the capital south to Vientiane, closer to the kingdom's economic heart and better positioned for trade. He strengthened Buddhism's role, outlawing certain animist practices at court, and launched campaigns to defend Lan Xang's borders against Siam and Burma. By this time, Lan Xang had earned its place among the recognized powers of the region. It was a kingdom rich in culture and resources, defended by armies of war, elephants, and united, however loosely, under the authority of the Chowfa. The integration of Thai political structures, Khmer cultural influences, and indigenous traditions had produced something distinct, a Lao civilization, confident in its identity, yet always aware of the fragile balance between unity and the autonomy of its Muang. But this rise was only the beginning. The golden age of Lan Xang still lay ahead, as well as the challenges that would test its unity. For now, the land of 1,000,000 elephants stood proud, a kingdom carved from the currents of the Mekong, the ambitions of princes, and the faith of its people. The morning sun rises over the Mekong, turning its surface into a ribbon of molten gold. From the banks below, Vientiane's wooden piers, traders push their boats into the current, sails catching the breeze. The smell of fresh river fish mingles with the fragrance of incense wafting from a nearby temple. The city hums with the confidence of a kingdom at its zenith. This is Lan Xang in its golden age. Powerful, prosperous, and proud. The seeds of this flourishing were planted in the reign of King Setthathirath, 1522–1548. His decision to move the capital from Luang Prabang to Vientiane was bold, but it paid off. Vientiane's location in the central Mekong basin offered fertile lands, better access to southern trade routes, and a strategic position against Siamese incursions. Setthathirath strengthened ties with Buddhist monasteries, invited learned monks from neighboring kingdoms, and made Buddhism the central pillar of state identity. Animist practices, though still alive in villages, were discouraged at court in favor of Theravada orthodoxy. The city itself reflected this cultural confidence. Wooden houses on stilts lined the streets, their verandas draped with hand-woven silk. Markets bustled with goods from across Southeast Asia, spices from the Malay world, lacquerware from Burma, ceramics from China, and fragrant sandalwood from the forests of Laos. Artisans crafted gilded Buddha images, intricate silver jewelry, and delicate textiles whose patterns told stories of river spirits, elephants, and celestial beings. After Setthathirath's death, his son, Setthathirath I, era 1548 a 1571, ascended the throne, a ruler remembered as one of Lan Xang's most capable kings. Setthathirath faced a volatile political landscape. The Burmese Tungu dynasty was expanding aggressively. Siam remained a rival, and internal unity was fragile. Yet he met these challenges with both diplomacy and ingenuity. Setthathirath fortified Vientiane, constructing massive earthen ramparts and strategically placed gates. He also commissioned that Luang, the great golden stupa that would become the spiritual heart of the Lao people. Rising high above the city, its gilded surface caught the sunlight at dawn and dusk, a beacon visible for miles. That Luang was more than a religious monument. It was a statement of Lan Xang's devotion, wealth, and permanence. But Setthathirath's reign was marked by more than building. When Burmese forces invaded in the 1560s, he employed guerrilla tactics, avoiding open battle but harassing supply lines, using the rugged terrain to his advantage. The campaign became a lesson in Lao resilience, the notion that a smaller, determined force, intimately familiar with its land, could withstand greater powers. Despite his successes, Setthathirath vanished mysteriously in 1571 while campaigning in Cambodia. His disappearance left a power vacuum, and Lan Xang endured a turbulent period of succession disputes and foreign interventions. The Burmese briefly occupied parts of the kingdom, and rival factions vied for the throne. Yet the kingdom endured, a testament to the strength of its political and cultural foundations. Stability returned under King Sourigna Vongsa, 1637–1694, the ruler most closely associated with Lan Xang's golden age. Sourigna Vongsa's reign is remembered as a time of peace, prosperity, and cultural brilliance. He reigned from Vientiane, but maintained respectful relations with Luang, Prabang, and Champasak, keeping the kingdom's major Muang loyal. Diplomacy was his art. He welcomed envoys from Siam, Vietnam, and even distant European powers. The Dutch East India Company sent traders, curious about the wealth of the Mekong basin. Jesuit missionaries visited his court, marveling at the sophistication of Lao culture and the strictness of its moral code. Sourigna Vongsa reportedly forbade corruption and demanded justice be applied equally, regardless of rank. The arts flourished. Poetry, religious manuscripts, and mural paintings adorned temple walls. Storytellers traveled from village to village, reciting the Jotaka tales, moral parables from the Buddha's previous lives, as well as local legends of Naga, giants, and the founding of the kingdom. Music filled the air at festivals, the keen, a bamboo mouth organ, weaving its hypnotic tones into the celebrations. Religion was not merely ritual, it was woven into governance. Monks advised the king, mediated disputes, and taught the young. Education for boys often began in the monastery, where they learned to read Lao script, itself refined during this era, and to memorize Buddhist scriptures. Sourigna Vongsa's court became known for its dignity and refinement. Foreign visitors described a ruler who lived modestly despite his power, devoted to the welfare of his people. Taxes were kept reasonable, and surplus rice was stored to aid communities during floods or droughts. Roads and river ports were maintained, allowing goods and ideas to flow freely. In the countryside, village life mirrored the stability of the capital. The rhythm of planting and harvest was punctuated by festivals. Pai Mai, the Lao New Year, when water splashed joyfully over friends and strangers alike. The Vat Luang festival, drawing pilgrims from across the kingdom, and countless local fairs where wrestling matches, boat races, and music brought communities together. Economically, Lan Xang thrived on its position as a middleman in regional trade. From the mountains came timber, resin, and precious metals. From the valleys, rice and cotton. From the forests, exotic animal products prized in distant markets. Traders from Siam, Vietnam, and even as far as Bengal came to exchange goods. This wealth funded temple construction, the patronage of the arts, and the maintenance of a strong military presence along the borders. Yet beneath the golden surface, challenges brewed. The very nature of Lan Xang's political structure, a loose confederation of Muang, tied by loyalty to the king, meant that unity depended heavily on the personal authority of the ruler. With a strong king like Sourigna Vongsa, the system worked. Without such leadership, centrifugal forces could pull the kingdom apart. As the 17th century drew to a close, the aging king left no direct heir. Succession disputes loomed. Ambitious nobles eyed the throne, and foreign powers watched closely, ready to exploit any weakness. The memory of past invasions lingered, and the Mekong, once a highway of wealth, could just as easily become a channel for invading armies. Still, in the final years of Sourigna Vongsa's reign, Lan Xang shone as a beacon of Lao civilization. Its temples glittered in the sun, its markets overflowed with goods, and its people enjoyed a rare and cherished peace. Travelers along the Mekong would see a land in harmony, monks chanting at dawn, farmers tending lush fields, and the golden stupa of that Luang rising above the horizon like a promise. It was a promise that would soon be tested, for with the king's death in 1694, the threads holding the land of 1,000,000 elephants together would begin to fray, and the age of unity would give way to an era of division and vulnerability, as Lan Xang fractured into rival realms. That, however, is the story of the next chapter. When the golden light fades and shadows lengthen over the Mekong moves with its ancient patience, carrying silt and secrets from the mountains to the sea. But in the year 1694, the river runs past a kingdom on the brink of change. The long reign of King Sourigna Vongsa, the wise and unifying ruler of Lan Xang, has ended. The throne stands empty of a direct heir, and with it, the center of gravity that held together the land of 1,000,000 elephants begins to crumble. For decades, unity had been a fragile balance of loyalty, shared faith, and the charisma of a single ruler. Without that ruler, the great tapestry of Lan Xang starts to tear along old seams. Noble families, once content with their positions in the court, now eye the throne. Ambitious Muang in distant provinces see an opportunity to assert their independence. The first fractures appear almost immediately. Succession disputes break into open rivalry, and rival claimants seek support from neighboring powers. Siam to the west, Vietnam to the east, and even Burma to the northwest. Each foreign court sees Lan Xang's instability as a chance to expand influence, and each is willing to back a claimant in exchange for tribute or territory. By 1707, the inevitable happens. Lan Xang formally splits into two kingdoms. In the north, Luang Prabang emerges as its own realm, still proud of its heritage as the original capital. In the south, Vientiane holds sway over the central Mekong Valley, claiming continuity with the grandeur of the Golden Age. For a time, both kingdoms coexist uneasily, each trying to assert legitimacy. The kings exchange envoys but also spies, measuring each other's strength. Into this delicate dance steps a third player, Champasak in the far south. Once a province under Vientiane's authority, it asserts its independence in 1713, backed by Siamese interests. What was once a single kingdom is now three: Luang, Prabang, Vientiane, and Champasak. Three siblings, bound by history, but divided by ambition. This fragmentation weakens them all. The unified military might of Lan Xang is gone. Now each kingdom must defend its own borders. Siam, ascendant under the Ayutthaya kingdom, exerts increasing pressure. It demands tribute from all three Lao states, seeing them not as equals, but as vassals in its expanding sphere. Vietnam, too, courts the Lao courts with offers of alliance, always with strings attached. Despite these political tensions, life for the ordinary villager changes more slowly. Rice is still planted when the rains come. Festivals still mark the turning of the year. Monks still walk the roads at dawn. But the taxes grow heavier. Armies need food and silver, and in divided kingdoms, the burden often falls harder on the people. The 18th century brings moments of resistance and tragedy. One of the most famous and tragic figures of this period is King Anuvong of Vientiane. Born in 1767, Anuvong came to the throne in 1805, at a time when Siam's dominance over Laos was nearly absolute. Siamese garrisons watched the roads, Siamese officials collected tribute, and the Lao courts were expected to follow Bangkok's lead. Anuvong was not content with this arrangement. He believed in the dignity of his kingdom, in the possibility of restoring Lao independence. For years he bided his time, strengthening his forces, fostering unity among his nobles, and watching for a moment when Siam might be distracted. That moment came in 1826, when Siam faced internal troubles and wars to the south. Seizing the opportunity, Anuvong launched a rebellion. His armies marched west, crossing into Siamese territory, aiming to reclaim lands once under Lan Xang's rule. For a brief heady moment, it seemed possible that Laos might rise again as a unified, independent power. But Siam responded with speed and overwhelming force. In 1827, Siamese armies pushed back, crossing into Vientiane. The city fell, its temples burned, its treasures looted. Anuvong fled north but was captured. He died in captivity in Bangkok in 1829, a broken man, yet remembered by the Lao as a hero, a symbol of defiance. The aftermath was grim. Siam tightened its grip, forcibly relocating tens of thousands of Lao people to the Korat Plateau, in what is now northeastern Thailand. These population transfers depopulated large areas of Laos, weakening its ability to resist further control. Vientiane, once a glittering capital, lay in ruins. Its role as a political center ended. Luang Prabang fared somewhat better, partly because it played the delicate game of diplomacy more cautiously. It maintained tributary relations with Siam, while quietly preserving its autonomy where it could. Champasak, too, survived under Siamese suzerainty, its rulers pragmatic in the face of overwhelming force. By the mid-19th century, all three Lao kingdoms existed in a precarious balance under Siamese dominance. Yet another power was approaching from the east, one that would alter the political map of Southeast Asia entirely. The French, expanding their colonial reach in Indochina, first arrived as explorers and missionaries. They mapped the Mekong, seeking a navigable route to China. They studied Lao culture, language, and history, not merely out of scholarly interest, but as preparation for political and economic expansion. By the 1860s, French influence in neighboring Vietnam was already strong. In Bangkok, Siamese officials began to realize that the European presence was not a passing curiosity but a gathering storm. For the Lao kingdoms, the French arrival was both a threat and an opportunity. Some rulers saw the French as potential allies against Siamese domination. Others feared exchanging one master for another. The decisive moment came in the 1890s, when French gunboats and diplomatic pressure forced Siam to cede all territory east of the Mekong to France. In 1893, the Franco-Siamese Treaty was signed. Laos, though still divided in local administration, became a French protectorate, part of French Indochina. The centuries of Lao independence, and even semi-independence under Siam, had come to an end. A new chapter was beginning, one in which the rhythms of village life, the Buddhist faith, and the memory of the land of a million elephants would endure under a foreign flag. But before we enter that colonial era, the legacy of this fractured century must be understood, the memory of unity lost, of kings and kingdoms brought low, and of a people who, despite division and exile, carried their identity in their language, their festivals, and their faith. It is a legacy that would shape how the Lao responded to the French, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with cooperation, in the turbulent years ahead. The year is 1893. The Mekong flows, as it always has, broad and unhurried, but its banks no longer belong to the Lao alone. On the eastern horizon, across the plains and forests, the tricolour flag of France now casts its shadow. The centuries of Lao kingship, fractured but alive, have ended with the stroke of a treaty. Laos is now a protectorate of France, a piece of the vast colonial mosaic called Indochina. The treaty was born not from negotiation among equals, but from gunboat diplomacy. French ambitions in Southeast Asia had grown steadily since their conquest of Cochin China in the 1860s and the annexation of Cambodia soon after. Their gaze fell upon Laos, not because of its wealth, though timber, elephants, and opium had value, but because of geography. The Mekong River, winding north to south, looked to Paris like a potential highway to southern China, a commercial artery that could bypass British and Siamese control. In 1893, after a series of border disputes and French military demonstrations, Siam was forced to cede all territory east of the Mekong. Overnight, centuries of Lao vassalage to Siam ended, only to be replaced by colonial subordination to France. At first, the French administration was light. Laos was poor compared to Vietnam or Cambodia. It offered little in terms of export crops or mineral riches. To Paris, it was more a buffer than a jewel, a way to block Siamese expansion and secure access to China. The capital was established in Vientiane, rebuilt from the ruins left by Siam's destruction in 1827. French officials, dressed in white linen suits, took up residence in villas along tree-lined boulevards. For the Lao elite, this new order was a paradox. On one hand, French protection ended the direct dominance of Siam. On the other, true sovereignty was gone. Kings were reduced to symbolic figures under French oversight. Luang Prabang, for instance, remained a royal seat, but its monarch now ruled only at the pleasure of the colonial administration. Daily life in the villages changed slowly at first. Rice was still planted, monks still led morning chants, festivals still filled the calendar. Yet colonial power filtered into the rhythms of life. Taxes were collected in cash, forcing villagers to sell forest products or work on colonial projects. Roads were built, not for local needs but for French economic and military purposes. In the hills, French officials encouraged the cultivation of opium, which could be taxed and sold at a profit through colonial monopolies. The French also brought schools, but not many. A handful of Lao boys, often from elite families, were taught French language and history. They memorized tales of Napoleon and Joan of Arc, learned to conjugate French verbs, and were told that they were part of a greater Indo-Chinese family. Yet the vast majority of Lao children remained in temple schools, where they studied Pali scriptures under saffron-robed monks. This dual education created a new social divide, a small French-educated elite and a broad population rooted in tradition. Missionaries arrived, too, mostly Catholic priests. They built churches in Vientiane and Luang Prabang, ministered to small communities of converts, and sometimes clashed with Buddhist monks. Yet Catholicism never spread widely. Buddhism remained the heart of Lao identity, resilient against foreign faiths. In the first decades of the 20th century, the French sought to consolidate their rule. They mapped the land, catalogued its resources, and imposed new administrative divisions. Provinces were drawn, governors appointed, and a bureaucracy established. The borders of modern Laos were fixed, not by Lao kings but by French surveyors. For ordinary Lao, colonial rule brought both hardships and curiosities. Some were conscripted to work on roads or plantations. Others were drawn into a cash economy through taxes and trade. At the same time, French products, cloth, wine, canned goods, appeared in markets, symbols of a distant, foreign world. The sight of French soldiers in helmets marching through Vientiane streets became part of everyday life. But not all accepted this new order passively. Resistance flickered in the hills, where ethnic minorities like the Hmong, Yao, and Kumu sometimes resisted taxation and colonial authority. Uprisings, though small, were frequent, especially in remote areas. French troops would march into the mountains, suppress rebellions, and then retreat, leaving a legacy of resentment. The Second World War brought the colonial system to its breaking point. In 1940, France itself fell to Germany, and its colonies in Asia came under the control of the collaborationist Vichy regime. Japan, rising as a power in Asia, moved into Indochina, stationing troops and using the territory as a base for campaigns in China and Southeast Asia. In Laos, Japanese soldiers marched through the streets of Vientiane, their presence both shocking and strangely liberating. For some Lao, the sight of European masters humbled stirred dreams of independence. In March 1945, Japan forced the French out entirely, declaring Laos independent under King Sisavang of Luang Prabang. For a few brief months, Lao nationalists spoke openly of separate, yet when Japan surrendered that August, the French returned, determined to reassert control. But the world had changed. Across Asia, colonies were breaking free. In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh declared independence. In Cambodia, nationalist movements gained momentum. In Laos too, voices grew louder. The Lao Isara, or Free Lao, a movement led by nationalist elites, emerged in 1945, seeking to end French domination. Though briefly suppressed, it planted seeds of resistance that would grow in the decades ahead. In 1946, France re-established the Indo-Chinese Union, but the days of unquestioned control were over. International pressure, especially from the United States and Britain, pushed France to grant more autonomy. In 1947, Laos received a constitution and limited self-government. The king remained on the throne, but now with a parliament and a cabinet, though still under French oversight. The turning point came in 1953, when the Franco-Lao Treaty granted full independence. The following year, at the Geneva Conference, the international community recognized Laos as a sovereign nation. After 60 years of colonial rule, the Lao once again stood on their own. Though their sovereignty would soon be tested in the storms of the Cold War, the French left behind contradictions. They had unified the territory of modern Laos, built infrastructure, and introduced new ideas of governance. Yet they had also exploited resources, imposed alien structures, and left much of the population impoverished and uneducated. Laos entered independence with fragile institutions, a small, educated elite, and deep inequalities. Still, the dream of self-rule was alive. The centuries of kings and kingdoms, the decades of colonial control, led to this moment. The Lao flag once again flew over Vientiane, and the people looked to the future. What they could not yet know was that independence would not bring peace, but conflict. Drawn into the Cold War, Laos would soon become one of the most bombed countries in human history. That story belongs to the next chapter, the era of the Kingdom of Laos, the struggle of rival factions, and the shadow of the Vietnam War. The year is 1953. After decades of French rule, the tricolor flag is lowered in Vientiane, and the Lao flag rises in its place. The streets echo with celebration. Monks chant blessings, villagers gather with offerings of flowers, and the Mekong carries the news downstream like a whisper of long-awaited freedom. Laos is now an independent kingdom, recognized by the world. But independence, as the Lao soon discover, is a fragile gift. The country that steps into sovereignty is young, underdeveloped, and divided. Its population is scattered across mountains and valleys, its roads few, its schools rare. The French have left behind borders and institutions, but they are thin scaffolding for a nation still finding its identity. And all around, the world is shifting into the shadow of the Cold War. The kingdom is born. At the heart of this new Laos stands King Sisavang, ruler of Luang Prabang. Since 1904, he is an elderly monarch, cautious and conservative, who prefers continuity over revolution. Under his crown, the Kingdom of Laos is declared in 1953, a constitutional monarchy with a parliament and a prime minister. But politics quickly proves unstable. Power is divided among three princes, cousins locked not only by blood but by ideology. Prince Sivanafuma, the neutralist, urbane and pragmatic, seeking a middle path between East and West. Prince Baon Om, the conservative, backed by royalists and right-wing forces, aligned with Western powers. Prince Suphanovong, the Red Prince, sympathetic to the communist Pathet Lao, supported by Vietnam and the Soviet bloc. Their rivalry will shape the fate of Laos, dragging the country deeper into the struggles of the Cold War. The Pathet Lao emerges even before independence. The Pathet Lao had formed as a nationalist and communist movement. Inspired by Vietnam's Viet Minh and supported by Ho Chi Minh, they fought against French rule in the northeast. After 1954, they refused to disband, instead establishing strongholds in the mountains near the Vietnamese border. The Geneva Conference of 1954, which ended the First Indochina War, recognized Laos's independence and declared it neutral, but neutrality on paper was fragile. The Pathet Lao kept their weapons and territory, while the government in Vientiane tried, and failed, to assert full control. In villages near the border, Lao peasants found themselves caught between two worlds, the government promising peace and stability, the Pathet Lao promising land reform and liberation from feudal elites. Monks preached calm, but fear grew. Who truly ruled the land? The king in Vientiane, or the guerrillas in the mountains? The American shadow. By the late 1950s, the United States had entered the stage. Washington saw Laos as a key domino in Southeast Asia. If it fell to communism, they believed Thailand, Cambodia, and beyond might follow. Aid began to flow. Money, weapons, and advisors. CIA operatives moved quietly in Vientiane, setting up what would become one of the agency's largest covert operations. Airstrips appeared in the highlands, carved out of jungle by local villagers under American supervision. Planes brought rice, medicine, and guns. The Hmong people, led by General Vang Pao, were recruited into a secret army to fight the Pathet Lao and their Vietnamese allies. In remote villages, Hmong recruits learned to handle rifles, mortar, and radios, fighting a war hidden from much of the outside world. For the villagers of Laos, the Cold War was no abstract rivalry of superpowers. It arrived in the form of strangers speaking foreign languages, planes roaring overhead, and whispered warnings about communist guerrillas or government soldiers. A land caught between the 1960s turned Laos into one of the most dangerous flashpoints of the Cold War. Governments in Vientiane rose and fell with dizzying speed, sometimes through elections, often through coups. Prime ministers changed yearly, sometimes monthly. Neutralists, rightists, and communists all vied for power, backed by their foreign sponsors. In 1960, Captain Kong La, a young paratrooper, staged a coup in Vientiane, declaring Laos should remain neutral and independent. His move threw the country into chaos. Within months, rival generals counterattacked, foreign powers intervened, and the cycle of instability deepened. The royal family tried to hold the crown steady, but the ground beneath was shifting constantly. Meanwhile, the Pathet Lao grew stronger, supplied by the North Vietnamese through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of jungle paths and supply routes running through eastern Laos. The trail became the lifeline of the Vietnamese war effort, carrying soldiers, weapons, and supplies south. Laos, whether it wished it or not, became the battlefield of another nation's war. The secret war. As the Vietnam War escalated, Laos became a secret war. Officially neutral, it was in reality one of the most heavily bombed countries in human history. Between 1964 and 1973, US warplanes dropped more than 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, more than all the bombs dropped during World War II. Cluster munitions rained down on the Plain of Jars, jungles, and villages. Pilots targeted the Ho Chi Minh Trail but often struck civilian areas. Villagers built shelters underground, living like moles to survive. Children learned to distinguish the whistle of approaching aircraft, to run for cover at the first sound. Even today, decades later, unexploded bombs remain buried in the soil, claiming lives when farmers plow their fields or children play in the grass. It is the deadly legacy of a war fought in shadows, rarely acknowledged at the time. The Hmong secret army, funded by the CIA, fought valiantly but at terrible cost. Families were uprooted, villages destroyed, thousands killed. For the Hmong, the war was not secret, it was their daily reality. Many would later flee to Thailand, and eventually, to the United States, their lives forever shaped by battles waged on behalf of a distant ally. The fall of the kingdom. By the early 1970s, the Kingdom of Laos was unraveling. Corruption plagued the government, foreign dependence undermined its legitimacy, and the people grew weary of endless conflict. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam, but they also signaled the end for Laos. Without American support, the royal government could not stand alone. The Pathet Lao advanced steadily, taking town after town. In 1975, as Saigon fell to communist forces in Vietnam, the Pathet Lao entered Vietnam. The monarchy was abolished, King Setthathirath forced to abdicate, and the Lao People's Democratic Republic was proclaimed. The royal family was sent to re-education camps. Many would never return. The aftermath. The Kingdom of Laos had lasted just over 2 decades, a brief chapter in the long history of the Lao people. Born in hope, nurtured in uncertainty, it was consumed by the currents of global rivalry. For ordinary Lao, it meant years of fear, upheaval, and loss. For the world, it was another forgotten battlefield of the Cold War. Yet the memory endures. The royal palaces of Luang Prabang, the stories of bravery and betrayal, the scars of bomb craters still visible in the countryside. The kingdom may be gone, but its story is inseparable from the Lao identity, a reminder of what was gained and what was lost in the struggle for independence and survival. As the Pathet Lao take power in 1975, a new era begins. Laos becomes a socialist republic, aligned with Vietnam and the Soviet bloc. The dream of unity remains, but now under a different banner. Whether this new system would bring peace or further hardship is the question of our next chapter. The socialist era and the opening to the world. The year is 1975. Across Southeast Asia, governments are falling, old orders collapsing. In Laos, the royal flag is lowered in Vientiane. The monarchy, which had guided the nation through independence, war, and upheaval, is no more. In its place rises a new banner, red, with a white disc in the center, symbolizing the full moon over the Mekong. The Lao People's Democratic Republic is proclaimed. For the new rulers, the Pathet Lao, this moment is triumph. After decades of struggle in the jungles and mountains, after years of fighting alongside their Vietnamese allies, they stand victorious. For the Lao people, however, it is the start of an uncertain chapter and experiment in socialism, shaped by ideology, necessity, and survival. The revolution takes hold, the monarchy is dissolved, its members sent to re-education camps. The royal palace in Luang Prabang is turned into a museum. Thousands of officials, officers, and intellectuals from the old order are detained, some for years, some never returning. Tens of thousands flee across the Mekong into Thailand, joining refugee camps that swell with Lao, Hmong, and other groups who fear persecution or starvation. The new government, led by the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, moves quickly to reshape the nation. Land is collectivized, private trade is restricted, state enterprises take over markets, rice mills, and transport. Soviet and Vietnamese advisors arrive in Vientiane, bringing manuals, slogans, and models of governance. The rhetoric is revolutionary. Laos will leap from feudal backwardness into socialist modernity, but the reality is harsher. The war has left the land, scarred fields littered with unexploded bombs, villages emptied, infrastructure minimal. Collectivization disrupts traditional farming practices. Shortages of rice, salt, and medicine grow. The promise of prosperity through socialism remains distant, while the daily struggle for survival deepens. The shadow of Vietnam in these early years. Laos is closely aligned with Vietnam, its powerful neighbor and wartime ally. Vietnamese troops are stationed in Laos, officially as defenders of the revolution. Trade flows eastward, and Lao foreign policy follows Hanoi's lead. Critics whisper that Laos has become little more than a satellite, its independence compromised even as its sovereignty is proclaimed. At the same time, the Cold War continues to shape events. The United States, having withdrawn from Indochina, cuts aid and imposes isolation. Western nations view Laos with suspicion, seeing it as part of the communist bloc. Soviet aid fills some gaps: fuel, machinery, scholarships for Lao students in Moscow. But Soviet-style planning proves difficult in a land of scattered villages and limited roads. Life under socialism for villagers. Life in the late 1970s and early 1980s is a mix of continuity and change. Rice planting still follows the rhythm of the monsoon. Festivals, though subdued, are still observed. Monks continue to chant at dawn, though temples receive fewer resources, as the government discourages excessive religious devotion. But the atmosphere is different. Travel permits are required. Traders risk arrest if caught selling goods outside state channels. Propaganda posters appear in towns, urging unity, discipline, and loyalty to the party. In schools, children learn new songs praising socialism and the brotherhood of Laos and Vietnam. For the Hmong, the aftermath is especially painful. Many had fought alongside the CIA's secret army during the war. Branded as enemies of the revolution, thousands flee across the Mekong or deeper into the mountains. Those who remain face suspicion, hardship, and sometimes violent reprisals. The scars of the secret war linger in whispered stories and fractured families. Winds of change by the mid-1980s. The limitations of strict socialism are clear. Agricultural output is stagnant. Smuggling thrives as people seek goods outside the rigid state economy. The Soviet Union, itself in crisis, can no longer provide endless support. In 1986, a major shift occurs. The Lao government announces the new economic mechanism Chintanakhanmai, inspired partly by Vietnam's reforms and China's opening. Collectivization is eased. Private markets are allowed to return. Farmers can once again sell surplus rice. Foreign investment is cautiously welcomed. The results are gradual but visible. By the 1990s, small shops appear in towns, selling imported goods, Thai soaps, Chinese textiles, Japanese electronics. Roads improve, funded by aid and loans. Hydropower projects begin along the Mekong and its tributaries, exporting electricity to Thailand. Tourism grows, especially after Luang Prabang is declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1995. Its golden temples and French colonial villas attracting visitors from around the world. A land of contrasts as Laos enters the 21st century, it is still one of Asia's poorest nations. Many villages lack electricity, healthcare is limited, and unexploded bombs from the war continue to kill and maim. Yet there is also progress. Literacy rises, life expectancy improves, and new schools and hospitals are built. The party remains in firm control. Elections exist, but only within the framework of the one-party system. Dissent is limited, though whispers persist in private conversations, and occasional protests flare, quickly suppressed. For most Lao, politics remains distant. Daily life revolves around family, farming, and festivals. Buddhism experiences a quiet revival. Monasteries reopen, rituals flourish, and the saffron robes of monks once again line the streets of Luang Prabang at dawn. The government, once wary of religion, now sees it as part of Lao identity and even promotes it as a cultural treasure for tourists. The global stage. Laos joins ASEAN in 1997, stepping onto the regional stage. It hosts summits, welcomes foreign delegations, and seeks investment. China emerges as a major partner, funding dams, roads, and, most dramatically, the new high-speed railway connecting Vientiane to Kunming. This link, completed in the 2020s, symbolizes Laos's integration into a broader Asian economy, but also raises fears of debt dependency and foreign influence. At the same time, Laos struggles with darker challenges. The Golden Triangle, long notorious for opium, becomes a hub for synthetic drugs and organized crime. Environmental issues grow as forests are logged, rivers dammed, and farmland converted. Young Lao migrate to Thailand for work, sending money home but leaving villages depopulated. The Laos of today, and so we arrive at the present. Laos today is a country of contrast, ancient and modern, poor yet changing, isolated yet connected. In Vientiane, new hotels rise beside temples. In Luang Prabang, tourists photograph monks at dawn, while elders still tell stories of kings and battles long past. In the countryside, farmers plant rice as their ancestors did, but now sometimes check weather forecasts on smartphones. The memory of war lingers in bomb craters, in refugee families abroad, in the silence of those who lost loved ones. But the resilience of the Lao people endures in their laughter during Pai Mai, in the songs of the keen, in the patient rhythm of life along the Mekong. The socialist experiment has evolved into a hybrid, one-party rule with a market economy, a nation balancing tradition and change. For some, it is progress. For others, compromise. For all, it is the lived reality of a small nation navigating the currents of a vast and shifting world. Looking ahead, what lies ahead for Laos? The challenges are clear: poverty, corruption, environmental strain, dependency on larger neighbors. But so are the strengths: cultural resilience, youthful energy, and a land rich in beauty. Laos is no longer hidden in the shadows of great powers. Its story is known, its heritage valued, its people determined to shape their own future. The journey from ancient villages to kingdoms, from colonial subjugation to Cold War battleground, from socialist experiment to modern state, is long and complex, but it is one story, flowing like the Mekong, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, always moving forward. And so our journey through the history of Laos brings us to the present, a land still finding its path, still healing from its past, still carrying the legacy of elephants, temples, and rivers. The story is not finished. It continues in every rice field, every chant, every child walking to school. Laos endures. Laos remembers. Laos moves on. The Mekong flows on, as it has through every chapter of Lao history. Its waters have carried hunters, kings, colonizers, and revolutionaries. And today, it carries fishermen in long, narrow boats, children splashing in the shallows, and tourists drifting downstream in wooden ferries. The river, timeless and eternal, reflects a Laos that is at once ancient and modern, culture alive. Despite wars, colonization, and political shifts, Lao culture endures with remarkable resilience. In Luang Prabang at the break of dawn, saffron-robed monks walk barefoot through the streets, collecting alms from villagers and visitors. The tradition has remained unbroken for centuries, a living reminder of the deep roots of Theravada Buddhism. Temples what still dominate town skylines, their golden stupas glowing at sunrise, their walls painted with scenes from the Jataka tales. Festivals are the heartbeat of Lao life. Pai Mai, the Lao New Year in April, turns streets into rivers of laughter and splashing water, a joyful cleansing of the old year and a welcome for the new. The Vat Luang festival in Vientiane gathers thousands of pilgrims around the great golden stupa, candles flickering against the night sky. Boat races, music, and traditional dance bring communities together, weaving continuity between past and present. Food, too, is culture. Sticky rice, eaten with the hands, remains the staple of every meal. Around it gather dishes of spicy papaya salad, grilled fish from the Mekong, and fragrant soups infused with lemongrass and herbs. To eat in Laos is not only to feed the body but to share, to connect, to honor the earth and water that provide the keen. A bamboo mouth organ plays melodies that are both plaintive and joyful, its sound carrying across rice fields at dusk. In its tones lie centuries of memory, from ancient rituals to modern celebrations. Storytelling, weaving, and folk art remain vibrant, often passed from grandparents to grandchildren, ensuring that tradition does not vanish in the rush of modernity. A modern nation, yet Laos is no museum of traditions. In Vientiane, motorbikes buzz through crowded streets, lined with internet shops and offices. Young people check messages on smartphones, post photos of festivals, and dream of opportunities abroad. Universities train engineers, doctors, and entrepreneurs. High-speed trains now link Laos to China, carrying goods and people across borders with a speed unimaginable only a generation ago. Tourism has become a vital part of the economy. Travelers come for the serenity of Luang Prabang, the mysteries of the Plain of Jars, the waterfalls of the Bolavan Plateau, and the slow charm of the Mekong. For many Lao, this brings jobs and income, but also questions how to welcome the world without losing what makes the country unique. The government, still ruled by the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, balances socialism with market reforms. Official speeches praise unity and discipline, but in practice, markets bustle with private traders, shops sell Thai and Chinese goods, and villages negotiate the realities of a mixed economy. Challenges ahead. Laos's future is not without difficulties. Poverty remains widespread, especially in rural areas. Many young Lao leave to work in Thailand, sending remittances home, but leaving villages without their strongest hands. Environmental challenges loom large. Forests are cut for timber, Rivers dammed for hydropower, land strained by shifting agriculture, organized crime and the drug trade haunt the Golden Triangle, complicating development and security, and the legacy of war still lingers. Millions of unexploded bombs lie buried beneath the soil. Farmers plowing fields risk their lives. Children stumble upon deadly remnants while playing. International organizations work tirelessly to clear the land, but it will take decades before Laos is truly free of this hidden danger. Strengths for tomorrow. Yet beyond the challenges lies resilience. The Lao people are patient, resourceful, and deeply tied to their land and traditions. Community is strong. Neighbors support each other. Temples remain centers of guidance, and festivals affirm unity. A new generation, better educated and more connected to the world than ever before, carries both ambition and responsibility. Culturally, Laos possesses treasures that are not only beautiful but unifying. The golden glow of that Luang, the chants of monks at dawn, the laughter of children throwing water at Pai, all remind Lao of who they are. The story of the past of Lan Xang, colonization, war, and revolution is not forgotten, but neither does it define the present alone. Laos today is writing new chapters, step by step, season by season, like the steady planting of rice. Conclusion. And so we come to the present, to a Laos both ancient and modern, a land of elephants and rivers, of temples and markets, of scars from war and hopes for peace. Its journey has been long, from prehistoric villages to the kingdom of Lan Xang, from colonial subjugation to Cold War battleground, from socialist experiment to cautious opening to the world. The river flows on, carrying memory and promise. In every rice field, in every chant, in every story told at firelight, Laos endures. Its future is uncertain, as every nation's future is, but its identity rooted in community, in faith, in the gentle rhythm of life along the Mekong remains unshaken. The story of Laos is not finished. It continues today, in the lives of its people, in the songs of the keen, in the dreams of children walking to school. And tomorrow, the river will still flow, and Laos will still rise with the dawn.